Welcome back to the Sina Good Health podcast. Today I'm with Brian Schreder. He is a physical therapist, and he's also my clinical instructor, which is why I had to grow out this beard. So,
I got a little bit of a head start on you, though.
Yeah. So we're just going to kind of talk about his experience with physical therapy and the field in general. I should have pulled out my questions ahead of time. I'm in school for being a physical therapist assistant, and Brian is a physical therapist. So Brian, can you just talk about your approach with the working relationship with PTAs, and how does that compare to other PTs?
Sure. So as you know, but your listeners probably don't all know, physical therapists have a little different role than physical therapy assistant in that we, physical therapists are the ones that will be doing initial evaluations and reassessments on patients, establishing goals. We're the ones that would interpret physician orders in order to get a plan of care started. We're developing the plan of care, and then a physical therapy assistant follows through with the whole plan of care. If there's adjustments needed, typically the PTA will talk to the supervising PT or the PT you're working with on the same team, and you come up with, if there's adjustment needed, if the patient's not tolerating therapy, or if they're advancing well, and maybe getting close to meeting their goals and either discharging, or so the physical therapist is has the role of and the license to be the decision maker more on the large scale. The PT assistant is the one carrying out the plan of care, or is able to do all that, making small adjustments as needed within their scope. Everywhere that I've worked, basically, I've had a real good working relationship with PTAs where I trust them to carry through with things and to let me know if there's changes, and I've worked with a good group of people that that's on top of things. Mm-hmm. And so I trust them to be able to do their job and just let me know if something comes up that's a problem. So some physical therapists are a little more, they want a little more control, just like in any field or in any two people that you meet. There's little variances in personality, and some people want a little more control, and so they want a little bit more communication,
or just very specific with the plan of care exercises.
Yes, they might give directives on, I want you to do this, this, and this today, and you don't deviate from that because I say so. Yeah. But my own personality is that we're all professionals, and you are trained, or you're, are being trained to be one of the people that, is very capable of treating and making those changes as needed, and being aware of what's going on. You're not just following a plan like a robot. You're trained to assess and communicate with and work with the patients just like a therapist.
So how do you go about kind of developing that trust, or do you just are you a more trusting person with a PTA?
I think I naturally am that way. I'm a give people the benefit of the doubt, sometimes to a fault, sometimes more than I should, but even when I work with a patient, I tend to believe them and what they're saying until it's kind of proven that it's maybe something fabricated, or we all have our lenses that we see life through and our filters and things, but I tend to be a little more trusting to begin with. But as you work with people, I think that you can
kind of figure out a rhythm and stuff.
Yeah, you learn strengths and weaknesses and things, and then you kind of go from there.
Sure. So how much of your day is paperwork, and do you have time to get it all done along with the sessions?
Paperwork, as you know, is the favorite part of all therapists' job. How much of my day, it's hard to come up with a number or anything, but I would say probably if I can document while I'm seeing patient at point of service, at least the majority of it, I shouldn't need more than 20 or 30 minutes at the end of the day to catch up. Sure. But there are days where I may need an hour to catch up from my day. The place that I work now, typically they'll schedule us with about 6 hours of patient care in an 8-hour day. Mm-hmm. So that other 2 hours is kind of time that gets eaten up with documentation, trying to coordinate patient visits if they're not available at the time, talk to nurses and other providers as needed about issues, and go through emails and address all these other things that come up throughout the day. So
like the drive-by questions and all that.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
what do you find frustrating about the job, and how do you deal with it?
Well, paperwork can often be a frustration, especially if there's any glitches in the documentation software and things. Another challenge is often, probably one of the most rewarding things is patient interactions. Probably one of the most difficult things is patient interactions because you think of the extremes, that
Mhm.
some are just really great and that makes it very fulfilling, and some are challenging, just trying to motivate people when they don't want to do something, or trying to understand, if they don't have a goal to do much, we want them to see that they have the potential.
Mhm.
Another frustrating thing can be when families get involved, if they're not willing to work as a part of the team. Sometimes, it's kind of ironic, but just in my experience, I've had a few where, working in like skilled nursing or transitional care facilities over the years, patient's easy to work with, the local family is easy to work with, but then the
In-laws from
child,
New York or
yeah,
whatever,
the child
kids.
comes in from out of state that never
Yeah.
sees them, and all of a sudden they want to control everything. And I don't know if it's compensating for
Probably.
their lack of,
Yeah.
they're trying to make up for what they know is that they don't get to see them that much, so now I got to take care of everything.
Mhm.
And then sometimes they get difficult to deal with, but
Yeah.
I think when you're working with people, if you work together on stuff, it's usually not that hard to.
Yeah, and we did have one interesting scenario where we were working with a patient, and we noticed that some of the family would kind of talk in an infantilizing way about him, and we had to kind of have them back off a little bit.
Yeah, that gets to be, we tend to treat our patients as adults, as they are, older adults, and sometimes in their mind, as they're going through the stages of dementia, they become younger in their mind, and they're remembering their younger adult years, or even their child years and stuff, and feeling like that's what they're going through, but we still tend to treat them like adults and talk to them like adults.
Yeah.
And,
Just basic respect.
and so it is can seem demeaning when you have other either professionals or family, talking like that. That was a bummer to kind of.
Well, and we've had conversations too about how, and I don't know what your experience is, but what I've seen in a lot of healthcare workers is they have this kind of high tone, loud, like, "Hi, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, we're gonna do some physical therapy, is that okay?" And there's no adjusting based on the patient's like personality or energy level or any of that, and it's just, to me it seems like that can be kind of condescending to the patients if they're at that cognition level to recognize it.
It's hard for me to talk about because I don't know if I have a system or an understanding of.
Sure.
We've talked about that before. Some of this stuff you just kind of naturally do, but when I'm talking to someone, if they're really down, I'll emotionally kind of come down to their level a little bit in order to relate and connect, and then hopefully bring them back up to a little better level. But if you are emotionally, say, at this energy level, high excited, or it's nice to, in my mind, to kind of try to match that energy level or that attitude or that mood that they're in, so you can kind of connect a little. And I think that they do respond better for me.
Yeah, because I think I'm thinking of the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book, where they talk about, and it's female psychology, but I think men might have it too, is if a woman is in a well and she's like up here is happy and normal and she's here, you need to not try to pull her up. You need to let her go all the way down so then she can shoot up. And that's what I kind of think about, is like, you, the clinician, are not trying to be like, "Oh, cheer up," or whatever. And I mean, it's the same kind of thing with talking to anybody that's kind of depressed. It's like, have you tried being not sad?
Yeah, right.
Thanks.
Yes. There you go. And I don't always have the answers or the right way to approach those things, but I learn as I go. I think most of us do.
And some of it is just being heard too, like just sympathetic, like just meeting them where they're at, and like yes, that's frustrating.
Yeah.
Can you talk about just the different kind of places or facilities you've worked and kind of the pros and cons of each?
Well, one thing about physical therapy that I like is that when you get into the field, there's a lot of options of where and what kind of facility or what kind of facilities or settings to work in. You know, you can work in a school, you can do aquatic therapy, you can work in outpatient therapy, you can work in a hospital, a rehab facility, a skilled nursing facility, so without having to go back to school and get another degree, you can do essentially a new kind of job by finding another kind of another niche or another, and even within those, there's people that do specialize in running injuries and specialize in, you know, different kinds of things. There's a lot of options out there, and so I would say to people going into it, that's often what I tell people considering it, that hey, that's one thing to think about. So I worked in an outpatient clinic for about 8 years when I was first out of school. Over the years, I've done some on-call or weekend work at a hospital. So some acute care, and then I've done some a few different jobs in skilled nursing facilities / rehab facilities. So different things that I've noticed. Every place that I've worked is different. The dynamics between the coworkers, the pay levels are different depending on the setting and the place, and the amount of continuing ed benefits. One of the places I worked, an outpatient facility, we had, I was a new grad and great mentorship, good people to work with in a small organization. So that was a good benefit. Pay wasn't super great, but they were really good with continuing ed benefits. So they paid thousands for me to go to multiple classes a year and learn a lot of new skills and in different areas that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten. One of the difficulties with that job was that they wanted work to be number one and family and everything else to be beyond or below that, and that didn't fit with my thinking, the lifestyle I wanted. I wanted to be able to, you know, work to provide for my family, not have my family be kind of subservient to my work, you know, type of thing. So it wasn't a great fit forever, but so we kind of grew apart. I have interned in facilities where the working relationships between colleagues in the therapy department was just, you could just tell there was this tension, and it was hard to get through the several weeks of interning because of that. I would have never wanted to work for a facility like that, in a group like that. So that's really important to me, to have good working dynamics, working relationships. Like in any kind of field, there will be a balance between, you know, if your priority is you want flexibility and family time, you may be on a different, you know, maybe you don't get the pay level. I mean, some you might get, if your priority is I want to get paid well and pay off these loans or whatever it is, you may be in a place that isn't as flexible with family time and you expect more out of you.
Is there anything you would like look to, like a red flag or something for a facility to avoid?
Thank you, that brought it right back to mind.
Okay.
Another important thing is I feel like it's really important to, in the healthcare field, to be patient focused, and so when you make decisions on how much care, what kind of goals, how long you plan to see this patient, that you're doing what's best for them, not what's best for the bottom dollar of the facility.
Right.
Some, I've heard of some that are a lot worse than others, and thankfully I haven't worked for places like this, but that productivity is like what they look for. When they evaluate if their therapists are effective, they look at what's your productivity, and if you're below a certain number, they penalize you or they humiliate you, and if you're above it, then they let you stay on, and they don't do that.
Yeah, it's avoiding the hammer or whatever, which is not a fun way to live.
Yeah. It's an immediate motivator to try to avoid, but it's not good for long-term, you know, relationships.
From what I've heard, like physical therapy is supposed to be like up there with the top for job satisfaction, because we get to see patients like with this place, a transition care unit, you're going to get them strong enough to go back home or to assisted living or wherever, and you get to see that progression from when they could barely walk to now they're walking and transferring all by themselves, and if you're having that stress of productivity and whatever, it kind of kills the joy of the job.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, and it can, I feel like it can make for a toxic working relationship and really reduce patient outcomes and job satisfaction, and it can be, you know, bring up some serious ethical things potentially.
Yeah, well, that was my next question is, are there any stories about ethical scenarios you've faced that you want to talk about?
Well, I do know that in some facilities, therapists in the past would get pressured to see patients for a certain amount of time so that they can meet a certain level of pay for the facility. Sometimes motivation can be based on, well, how are we going to get the most money in? So we'll see them this amount of time to get, and I feel like that can bring up big ethical things. That's probably the biggest one that comes to mind. There are other things, but I think as a whole, the therapists and therapy teams that I've worked with are pretty very ethical, you know, and want to do what's best for the patient, want to advocate for the patient. Sometimes there can be a little bit of, I don't know if this is the right term, but kind of a turf war over the patient. Like a therapist might observe something that we think is a medical issue and might bring it to the nursing staff or the medical staff, and if I don't get the response I'm hoping for, then I might feel like, then I gotta go to the next person I gotta advocate for. And in my line of thinking and my way of thinking, I've got a job to do and they have a job to do. I'll do mine, I'll advocate for them, and I'll trust them to do their job. Yeah. And if there's something that's hugely wrong, then you might have to go right directly to the doctor or the medical provider, but you gotta work well with your team.
Yeah, and I think broadly the other ethical thing that doesn't seem like you have a problem with is just treating people with respect like they're adults. And with your approach, that's already a baseline, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think everybody that I work with has a ability that does treat people with respect, and might have different ways of relating to and different ways of communicating, but I feel like everybody in the therapy profession is not doing it for themselves, generally speaking. We're doing it for the people that we serve, and you know, and so we have motives that are pure, I think, in that. And so if you want to make money, you're probably going to find another profession, you know, that's not as hard to get into and as much work to get into, and you know, maybe, you know, pays better for that. So
yeah. Is there anything that you've learned that they don't teach you in school?
No, just kidding.
What would be the most useful of that?
I think one of the things that, you know, when you're in school for therapy, you know, they have to teach you certain things that, you know, the anatomy, the body, the physiology of the body, how things work together, how problems affect all normal function. And they may try to teach some of the interpersonal skills, but I didn't feel like that was a focus of my school, at least. I feel like I had to learn a lot of that on the job from examples and mentorship that I had, and just picking things up from people that were successful, and
just experience.
Just experience, communication, listening to patients, listening to what they're showing and not always just what they're saying, because there's a lot of nonverbal, as you know, from communication things. Those soft skills of how to relate to people, and I feel like that patient satisfaction is largely related to the experience that they had and how well they got along with and liked their therapy staff, not even more so than their outcomes, from what I've read and heard. So, and it seems that way too, that kind of holds true with people I've seen. So those are skills that you have to either know beforehand or pick up on the job that you don't really get in school. Sure. There are other technical skills. You know, I was able to take some courses that were, like, one was on assessment and treatment of foot and lower extremity conditions, and got a lot more into detail of biomechanics of the foot and ankle and lower extremity, and how, you know, how to treat different problems with orthotics and exercise, and a lot more specific things. And you can do a lot of manual therapy courses, and there's a lot of higher level things that you don't get in school, but probably the biggest one is the interpersonal stuff that you just have to learn, experience. That's it.
What kind of continuing education stuff have you found like the most useful, and was there anything that wasn't as useful? Like, is there anything, like, as somebody who just graduated, they should do this one first because it's really handy?
Sure. I think it really depends on your interests and what you're using, what kind of setting you're in. I really like that foot. It was, I don't know if they even have the course anymore, but it was called When the Foot Hits the Ground, Everything Changes, I think. And then there was a sequel to that, something similar to that title. And that was a really good course if you're interested in foot and ankle and lower extremity biomechanics. But that was years ago, and I don't know if that course exists anymore. I've done a couple of online courses on running injuries. Even though I work with older adults, I like to think about, running mechanics and how that could fit into a practice. I just haven't
because
used that.
they could have been a runner for however many years, and then they got a knee injury or knee replacement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that was another one that I've liked.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of manual therapy courses that people like to do. I haven't done as many of those as some people. I like to work with vestibular problems, dizziness.
Mm-hmm.
So I've taken a couple courses on that have been helpful. With older adults, there's a lot of people that experience dizziness, and there's a lot of causes of it, but at least those vestibular courses try to help you sort out kind of piece together what's causes of dizziness and what there might be some things that therapy can do to address it, especially from the inner ear vestibular issues. And then if that's not it, maybe what other directions do you take?
Okay. So with continuing education, is it sometimes the facility wants you to take X, Y, or Z course, or is it just you just need to take something to renew your license, or how does that work?
I think it can be both. It has been both in my career.
Mm-hmm.
My first job, they kind of steered me toward a few that that fit the niche of that practice.
Mm-hmm.
But since that first outpatient job, it's kind of been up to me, what do I want to take, And sometimes I'll look at what is the facility or the group I'm with, where are we lacking, or what could we provide better, and so maybe I'll study something or take a course that'll kind of help provide for that need.
Are there any kind of cool success stories you've had that you're able to share with patients?
There's a lot of them. Right now, I'm not thinking of any one particular thing that, but those are the things that make therapy fun. And sometimes it's really what you might think of as a small victory, like someone that maybe was just in a grumpy mood the last 2 weeks, and all of a sudden one day they kind of turn the corner. You kind of, so sometimes it's just something as little as, hey, now they're going to interact with me politely, and now they're going to work. We can work together as a team, and that might be the success. And sometimes it's someone that hasn't walked for months with a major injury, and now they can. And now they can, get back to walking and get back to activities that they weren't doing for a while. It's just fun to see people get back to home or get back to their lifestyle that they were before after having an injury or an illness.
Okay. So this has been new for me, physical therapy being an active job, and you're on your feet all day. And it took about 2 weeks for my feet to not be sore at the end of the day. So for you, you've been doing this for a while, so how has physical therapy affected your body / fitness being in the job for a number of years?
Well, I've always tried to have a proactive approach to keeping fit and keeping strong myself. That's just my personality. So I think that it helps if you are in shape, and not to say I'm in shape, but I try to do some, cardiovascular and strengthening and things because I want to be able to move for years from now. And so the job will intermittently demand, high amounts of load where you're lifting a heavy patient or rolling or pulling or pushing. And then there's times where you're not doing much physically, so you're not going to have time to warm up and stretch and be prepared. So you kind of do have to have some
baseline flexibility.
But having some kind of something to draw from to use when you want to.
So what do you think will be coming in the future for physical therapy? Are there any technology, inventions, or trends you're excited to get mainstream acceptance?
Well, I know that the military is doing a lot of things. I think they're heavy into research, and there's probably other private enterprise that's doing research in robotics and exoskeleton, moving parts and stuff that will connect to the brain somehow. So there's a lot of potential out there. I don't know what's all up and coming. I don't stay real up on it.
Sure.
Because our facility isn't going to buy $1 million leg or something to help someone walk. We're going to work with what we have and the budget that we have. So it's hard for me to keep up on, but there's a lot of cool things out there. I don't know if you have seen things in school that...
it's more on my own because they're more on what's been proven instead of what's coming.
Sure.
But I mean, some of the stuff on nerve regeneration, we did go into what's being worked on right now.
Sure.
And that's promising for people with spinal cord injuries or whatever other issues.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I did read something about a implant maybe that would somehow go in the spine, and I don't know if it must, I'm presuming it must, you know, sort of wirelessly, for lack of a better term, you know, get signals from the brain spinal cord about what you're doing, and then stimulate the right parts of the you know, hopefully communicate both ways, sensory and motor. But
yeah,
yeah, it sounded like there was something successful with that recently. I can't recall the details. But
yeah, and I don't know if it's specifically read that, but it's not further. So is there anything that you're bummed has kind of fallen out of favor, or something that you were doing that research kind of flipped and said wasn't effective? And to help your brain, we've talked a little bit about like inflammation and ice.
Yeah, so there was recent articles out that were suggesting that the rest, ice, compression elevation, the RICE method that we've used for years, saying maybe we should take the ice out of that because we want to let inflammation run its course, and maybe heat is better to get circulation to and from that injured part. And so, you know, like anything, there might be new studies that come out that say this is better. You know, they'll say cold is better, now they'll say hot is better, and probably a few years from now they'll go back to saying cold is better.
Yeah.
So I don't jump on the bandwagon real quick when new research comes out, but I like to be aware of it. And some of our patients and their physicians are really heavy on, we got to ice this frequently, and we go along with that plan and ice it because it's not proven to do any harm.
Right.
It's not really proven which one works better, and some will go to warm a little bit sooner, or just no cold, no ice, or less ice early on.
Yeah.
So kind of working within patient preferences on that one.
Yeah.
I know when I started out, ultrasound was kind of a frequently used modality, and since I've been in the field, it's been more and more like proven that it's not effective, and insurances a lot of times don't cover it, and some therapists still use it, and sometimes you see results, and whether it's placebo or what, sometimes patients get a benefit. So I don't know that I'm disappointed that it got bad remarked. If it gets
or it's just
bad
now,
research,
it's just now we know it maybe.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because it's like we went from leeches to other
bloodletting
to so
Yep.
What are you looking for in a PTA? And I know you're not the one who directly hires, but just what would make a good one that you'd want to hire or work with?
I think anybody that I work with, I like if they're open to self-assessment and kind of self-progression type of things, like evaluating if they're doing their job. You know, some people are very confident, and that might sound like a good attribute initially, but if you're overconfident and you're doing the wrong thing, then you're not doing the patient or yourself any favors. So I think someone that's open to correction, or that's teachable, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a teachable person, and even though I'm in a role where I'm trying to lead, and I'm learning things from you too, and or my colleagues or my patients all the time. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. One thing that turns me off is if I suggest something, or if I say, hey, this is missing from the note, and then someone always has an excuse or an explanation. Well, it's because of that, and like always defending yourself. I don't feel that that's professional, kind of, I guess. So they may have a reason, and maybe there are times where you don't just want someone else to tell you how it is or how it should be, because we might have different ways of doing it, but you can tell, and patients are like that too sometimes. Everything you suggest, well, I can't do that because of this, I can't do that because of that, I can't do that. And they have a kind of excuse for everything, so. And that's kind of off-putting to me. But another, good traits are people that are good listeners, that can really listen to their patients, someone that has, that values life and, the human being highly, I guess. Most people that are going into therapy fields already kind of have that, I guess, but I actually think it's an asset to have a good life balance, not have your job be your only important thing. In some fields, that if you go for an interview, they want to know that employer wants to know they're going to be the number one and the number two and the number three. And I think that's not good. in my opinion, for anybody's health.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and one thing with physical therapy too is it's kind of after the emergency compared to like a hospital, you know, so you shouldn't need to be, I mean, yes, physical therapists sometimes need to be on call for staffing and the PTA ratio and whatever, but if you're not going to get the call at 2 a.m. like, oh my God, we got to get this person walking.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. I have heard of PTs though that'll work in an emergency room, and it'll be like maybe vertigo assessment type of thing. Someone goes into the ER, and if a PT sees them and does a vertigo assessment, and they're able to treat it in one session, and that patient walks out the door with no symptoms, that's a pretty successful visit to the ER.
Right.
And so, or maybe you get sent down there for crutch training when someone's got it, and so there are times where there's an urgent need, but it's not that it's life or death.
Yes, you can have a PT in a hospital. It's just it's the 2 a.m. phone call is like emergency surgery. It's not gonna, so,
right. Yeah, that's another thing that attracted me to the field of PT versus like potentially thinking about going into medicine for a while or something. I'm like, pretty likely I'm not going to have overnight shifts and that kind of thing. Be called in emergency. Yeah. So.
Well, and another thing that and assuming we were both on the same page of is just, and it's not, we are working with the elderly, but in general, prevention is a lot better than, and that just means building strength and flexibility and motor skills with transferring and walking and whatever. So. And that's something I'm hoping in the future is shifting the general focus of healthcare instead of when someone is 60 plus trying to undo like 4 or 5 decades of everything, poor eating, poor posture, poor body mechanics, etc. And getting, like, one of the fitness offers I like talks about like get in shape once in your like teens or 20s, and then it's so easy to maintain it. And I mean, stuff happens, you have accidents, car crashes, whatever, but still, if your baseline is that much stronger and limber and whatever, then it's not such a fight to get back on your feet, sometimes literally.
Yeah, right, yeah, like if you think of a car, if you start letting one thing go on your vehicle and another thing go and another thing go, pretty soon you're driving this old jalopy and nothing works. But if you can keep up and, things will go wrong. You need to rotate the tires, you need to replace the tires, you need to do the brakes, you need to do the oil, and regular maintenance for the body is motion, activity, staying flexible, staying strong, challenging yourself to do things that you don't need every day. And another analogy I sometimes use with patients to try to explain to them, we aren't just trying to get you to a baseline where you can just barely do the activities of life. We want you to have a reserve of good fitness, kind of like a bank account with a lot of money in it. Even though the economy might crash, analogous to you get sick or you get injured, you've got this reserve of fitness. Yeah. So it still takes you down quite a bit, but you're able to build it back up much quicker than if you had nothing to begin with.
Yeah, and if you're starting here and this is the bottom and you get sick and it's like, you might not make it.
Right, yeah. So to have a fitness account, kind of, that's a reserve of strength and endurance and things that you can draw from.
Yeah, which is different than, I don't know if it was Ben Franklin or one of the like colonial days guys was talking about, he believed that you had a finite number of heartbeats, so he refused to exercise to
really?
that much.
Interesting, yeah.
So, which, I mean, technically you do have a finite number of heartbeats, but still, that's not how it works.
It's not predetermined how many heartbeats in your life.
So,
interesting, yeah.
And then the last question is just any advice for surviving, and it could be PT or PTA school / the licensing exam. Because to me, it's just kind of insane to, you have 2 or 3 years of school and it's like, okay, remember everything, and you get this one test.
Yeah, it's a lot of memorizing when you're studying for tests, but it's also a lot of understanding how that applies. Because it was 25 years ago that I did my licensure exam, so my memory, and as soon as I was done with it, I was like, okay, I'm ready to forget that because it was stressful. But it's not just being able to recite facts or, but you got to understand it so you can understand their scenarios and then what's not only the right answer, but what's the best answer of these four, you know, that's
Yeah.
the part that's.
And probably a fair amount of them are not just memorizing the fact. They're like what you're saying is you need to know that fact and then apply it to this scenario. So it's that higher level thinking that they're testing, which I really like. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you know, we've talked about this before, but you're always looking for that higher level thing. You're the student that's been asked, you know, from day one, asking questions. Well, what about this? And what if it was this way? And tell me something. You know, always seeking more information, seeking that higher level of understanding. So that'll help, I'm sure. But yeah, that kind of inquisitiveness is good to have, and yeah, try not to just study the facts and the information, but understand it. Yeah. And that's what you need for the job too. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's about what I have.
All right.
So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah. Hope it turns out all right.